My wife dropped a cheating bomb over dinner. I signed papers, vanished to a river cabin, and watched her brunch circle finally realize he was gone. The steam from the coffee barely curled above the rim of Jack's mug when she said it. I'm done. I want a divorce. No preamble, no shaky breath. Just those 7 words dropped like a steel anchor onto their worn oak table. The same one they'd bought at a yard sale back in '03, when they still laughed in the mornings and touched knees without thinking. Jack didn't flinch. He just blinked once, slowly, like a man adjusting to a shift in the weather. Linda, seated across from him in her crisp cardigan, had rehearsed this, probably in front of the mirror in the guest bathroom, the one she'd slowly claimed over the past year, first with lotions, then with her own towel rack. Her voice was too steady, too measured. She'd come to this kitchen not to talk but to perform. Jack could smell the script on her breath, even under the bitterness of the coffee she didn't usually drink. He reached for the sugar jar without looking up, stirred once, then twice. Let the silence expand just enough to make her shoulders shift in discomfort. All right, he said finally, let's do it. Linda blinked. He sipped his coffee. The mug clinked gently as he set it down. For a second, just a flicker, her bottom lip twitched like it wanted to argue. But she hadn't prepared for this version of him. She'd packed for war. He handed her peace. Weaponless, indifferent. She had no map for this terrain. I'll have the papers sent, she added, trying to regain altitude. Jack nodded. I figured. You're efficient. Her eyes narrowed a fraction, unsure if that was a compliment or a cut. In truth, it was both. She slid a manila envelope across the table like a blackjack dealer laying down a final hand. The edges were sharp, pristine. He didn't touch it. There's a list, she said. Assets, accounts, who gets what. I've kept it fair. Jack glanced at the envelope, then back at her. She was already pushing back her chair, standing a little too fast, as if rushing the moment would make it sting less. You're calm, she said finally. It wasn't admiration. It was confusion. He shrugged, leaning back. What's the point in shouting over something you rehearsed? Now that. It landed. Her eyes flared, just briefly, like someone caught naked under a spotlight. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Jack watched as the confidence began to crack in her posture. Not all at once, just small fissures. She expected a beggar, a man on his knees, maybe tears, maybe accusations. Instead, he reached for a pen from the counter and scrawled something on the envelope she just offered him. Nothing dramatic, just a single word. Received. Then he stood, took his mug and rinsed it under the faucet, like it was any other Tuesday. Linda lingered. Silent. The performance was over. No applause. Just the hiss of water and the gentle clink of ceramic against the sink. When she left, heels clicking on the tiles like a metronome counting down the death of a marriage, Jack didn't watch her go. Instead, he opened the window. The October air bit at his face, and for the first time in a long, long while, he breathed. He didn't even argue, Linda told them, swirling her Chardonnay like it was part of the act. It was Thursday night, book club night. But nobody had cracked open the copy of The Nightingale. The hardcover sat untouched in the center of the coffee table, just another prop in her carefully curated scene. They were seated in Marianne's sunroom, the kind with overcushioned chairs and that lemon verbena candle always burning. 5 women, mid-60s, upper middle class, aging like Pinterest boards, controlled, pastel, performative. Linda reclined with practiced ease, angling her body just right to catch the soft light. He just nodded, she continued, said, let's do it, and went back to drinking his coffee like I'd asked him to pick up milk. There was laughter. A few gasps. Tracy, the one with 3 ex-husbands, clapped like it was a punchline. You broke him, she said. Linda smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. He's been stuck in neutral for a decade, she said. I just released the parking brake, and that should have been the end of it. The final victory lap. Except it didn't land the way she expected. A few days later, while buying wine at the co-op, Linda caught the cashier whispering something to another employee just after she paid. Both of them glanced away, quickly, guiltily. On Wednesday, she ran into Margaret Hines outside the post office. Margaret, who never liked Jack, who once called him the human wrench, smiled a little too softly and said, Heard Jack's been going to the gym again. That's great. Change is good. The gym. Jack hated treadmills. Used to say if he wanted to run in place, he'd stay married. And then there was Betty from church, the one who couldn't keep a secret if you stapled it to her gums. Betty leaned in after choir practice and said, with a conspiratorial smirk, "Saw Jack at Tino's steakhouse the other night." "Was that your niece he was with?" She looked way too young for him. A giggle. Or maybe just young enough. Linda laughed. Loudly. Too loudly. "Must be a misunderstanding," she replied, brushing lint from her coat that didn't exist. But something in her stomach twisted. Tino's wasn't a grab-a-bite kind of place. That was anniversaries, proposals, celebrations. The next morning, while walking her poodle down Main, she passed the window of Turner's Men's Outfitters and stopped. There, in the display, a camel-colored jacket, familiar, tailored, the kind Jack used to sneer at as a wallet suck for suckers. But she'd know that broad-shouldered frame anywhere. Jack, reflected in the glass, talking to the owner, smiling. When was the last time he smiled like that? At her? That afternoon book club met again. Linda arrived first, poured the wine herself. When the others filtered in, she was already mid-sentence. So, Jack's reinventing himself now, joining gyms, shopping at Turner's, even eating red meat again, she said, too flippantly. Marianne raised an eyebrow. He seems lighter. Maybe divorce suits him, Tracy added. And for the first time in that group, Linda felt something she hadn't expected. The shift. She wasn't the one being envied anymore. She was being studied, as if she were the one who'd been left. No one said it outright, but she could hear it in their silence. What's he up to? Later that night, alone in her oversized house with too many framed photos and not enough footsteps, Linda poured herself another glass of wine, sat by the window, and stared at nothing. She told herself she wasn't worried, but her reflection, blurry in the glass, wine-red lips too tight, wasn't buying it. Jack didn't make a list. He didn't need to. The morning sun slanted through the garage windows as he pulled down the battered duffel bag from the shelf, the same one he'd taken to work for 20 years, still dusted with grease at the seams. He laid it open on the workbench like a body bag and began filling it with purpose. One hammer, his socket wrench set. The steel flashlight his daughter gave him when she still called on Sundays. A faded flannel shirt that still smelled like cedar and motor oil. 4 framed photos, 2 of his kids, 1 of his late golden retriever, and the last, of his father standing beside the Dodge he'd rebuilt from scratch. That was it. No books, no clothes beyond the basics, no trophies from long-dead bowling leagues, no keepsakes from the glass cabinet Linda had always dusted more than she touched. By noon the truck bed was loaded, 3 plastic bins, a tool chest, and the duffel. His old army coat was rolled and tied, wedged beside a cooler full of apples, jerky, and the black coffee thermos he trusted more than most people. Linda wasn't home, probably at her facial, therapy, or lawyer. Take your pick. She hadn't bothered to text. Jack walked through the house once more. The rooms were still, holding their breath. He moved like a ghost, past the couch she never let him lie on, past the hallway where the family photos used to hang before she updated the aesthetic. He stopped at the threshold of their bedroom but didn't step inside. Instead, he turned left, into what had been his workshop until Linda converted it into a reading space she never read in. The built-in shelves were still bare. Her minimalist fantasy had succeeded in wiping out everything but its own hollowness. He chuckled to himself, soft and dry. In the kitchen, he scrubbed his mug, dried it with the dish towel, and left it on the rack. No note. No scene. Just one small thing, a post-it on the fridge with his forwarding P.O. box for tax forms. It read, at 3:42 p.m., the truck rolled down the gravel drive. No neighbors watched. No dog barked. He didn't look back. Linda returned at 5:10. She opened the front door and stood frozen in the foyer. The air inside the house felt lighter. The silence wasn't just quiet. It was complete. She walked from room to room. Nothing was broken. Nothing disturbed. The closet, his half, was empty. The dresser, every drawer opened clean. In the garage, she found only her car. The nails in the wall where his tools used to hang were bare, but not jagged. He'd even patched the holes. And that was what struck her most. Not the fact that he was gone, but that he'd left perfectly. No rage, no damage. No how dare you or you'll regret this. Just nothing. No emotional fingerprints for her to trace. No messages to dissect. No dust trail of grief she could pretend was hers to sweep up. She stood alone in their bedroom, staring at the nightstand where his reading glasses used to sit. All gone. He hadn't fought. Hadn't cried. Hadn't stumbled. He'd exited like a man who had already been gone for years. And that, That terrified her more than any screaming match ever could, because in his silence she heard finality, and in that finality she realized she had no power left to take. It started with a whisper in the frozen foods aisle. Linda had been comparing labels on organic peas, mostly for show, when Martha Griggs, the neighbor 2 blocks over with the always too red lipstick and a tongue sharper than any snow shovel in Idaho, sidled up beside her. "I saw Jack last night," Martha said, voice pitched just low enough to masquerade as casual. Linda didn't look up from the bag in her hand. "Oh?" "At Tino's Friday night crowd. He looked, well, different." That got her attention. "Different how?" Linda asked, sharper than she meant to. Martha smiled like she'd just been dealt a royal flush. "You'll see." And then she walked off, leaving the freezer door hanging open behind her like a dropped invitation. Back home, Linda couldn't help herself. She logged on to X, not to stalk, of course, just to browse. The town's community board was always buzzing with useless drama, lost dogs, bake sales, someone complaining about the pothole on Elm. But then she saw it. Buried in a thread about unexpected sightings in Boise, under a post captioned "Spotted at Tino's Friday night," was a grainy photo. 2 figures. Candlelit booth near the window. Jack, smiling. Not the polite, forced smile he used at dinner parties. A real one. The kind that reached his eyes. And across from him, a woman. Mid to late 50s maybe. Silver blonde hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Leather jacket draped over the chair. She had one hand around a tumbler of bourbon and the other casually resting on the table, close to his. Linda zoomed in until the pixels bled. The woman was laughing. Jack was leaning in. Poised, that was the word. Effortlessly put together. Not overdone, not local. Definitely not from Boise. The comments spiraled beneath the image. "Glad to see Jack out and about. He looks good. Wait, is that Claire R? Retired Air Force? No way. That woman used to fly Black Hawks." Linda closed the laptop too fast. The screen thunked shut like a slammed door. Claire R. She didn't know her, not directly, but she knew of her. A few years younger, rumored to have bought a plot of land out near the Snake River, divorced, no kids, traveled a lot. The kind of woman who said things like, "I don't do drama," and actually meant it. The kind of woman Jack never would have approached during their marriage. Or so she thought. The next morning, Linda ran into Marianne at the florist. Another coincidence that wasn't. "I heard Jack's dating again," Marianne said, not even pretending it was gossip. "Saw a photo, honestly. He looks 10 years younger." Linda forced a smile. "Maybe she's a cousin." Marianne laughed. "Cousins don't sit like that." That night, Linda lay awake in the king-sized bed she used to complain was too cramped when Jack was beside her. The sheets were cold, but she refused to pull the quilt up. She told herself she didn't care. But when she reached for her phone at 2:47 a.m., scrolling back to that blurry photo, zooming in again on his smile, she felt something burn beneath her ribs. It wasn't love. It was possession, slowly unraveling. And jealousy, bitter and metallic, bloomed quietly in her mouth like blood from a bitten tongue. The cabin wasn't listed on Zillow. Jack had found it the old-fashioned way, through a friend of a friend. A hunting buddy who'd been looking to offload the place before winter. No bidding war, no fuss, no inspection team clomping through with clipboards, just a handshake, a decent price, and the sound of the Snake River humming below the bluff. It wasn't huge, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, but the layout felt like a declaration. Cedar walls that smelled like the forest even after years of fires. A black cast-iron stove tucked into a stone hearth. A front porch that faced west, catching every burnt orange sunset like it had been positioned by God himself for late-life epiphanies. By the end of week 1, Jack had stripped away every trace of his old life. No more coastal artwork Linda had ordered from catalogs. No artificial ferns. No live, laugh, love signs in distressed wood. In their place, framed maps of places he'd never had time to visit. His rebuilt fly-reel collection hung like artwork above the coat rack. The old bookshelf now held dog-eared westerns, a battered guide to native birds, and a single photo, Jack at 12, standing beside a trout nearly as long as his arm. And Claire. Claire didn't move in. She didn't need to. She arrived like she belonged to the space before he even did. She carried no emotional baggage, just a leather overnight bag and an ease that made Jack forget there had ever been anything before her. They didn't talk about their pasts much, not because they were hiding, but because neither of them needed the mirror. She spoke in stories, not complaints. She had this way of pouring bourbon that felt like a ceremony, and her laughter, low, raspy, real, rolled through the cabin like a second fire, warming the place. She didn't ask permission to change the music when she cooked. She didn't try to rearrange the furniture. She didn't need to make the space hers, because she respected that it already was his. One morning, after a quiet breakfast of eggs and sourdough, Jack stepped out onto the porch with his mug. Claire followed, barefoot, hair still wet from the shower, and stood beside him. No words, just the river and the sound of wind through pine. Jack looked over and caught her watching the horizon with the same expression he'd had when he first unlocked the front door to this place. Like someone who had finally stepped into their real life. Across town, Linda stood in her walk-in closet, surrounded by designer coats and too many pairs of boots that had never touched dirt. The window overlooked her manicured garden, currently suffocating under frost. She had just seen a new photo on 10th. Jack and Claire on the porch, matching mugs, a trout strung up between them, caught that morning. Claire's arms slung over his shoulder, eyes squinting from the sun, laughing like she'd never known the weight of pretense. The caption read, "New traditions, better mornings." Linda stared at the screen longer than she meant to. Her own reflection ghosted in the glass, lined, lacquered, and a little too sharp. She used to be the standard, the one other wives compared themselves to. Now she felt like a Polaroid from a drawer no one opened anymore. Outdated, overlit, forgotten. The woman Jack used to need no longer existed. And the man he'd become, she wouldn't have recognized him even if he'd walked right past her in a crowded room. The text wasn't impulsive. Linda crafted it with precision, rewrote it twice, deleted the third version, poured a second glass of Merlot, paced, came back, and finally, after 27 minutes of mental gymnastics, typed the 4 words she thought would reset the board. "We need to talk." She hit send, then stared at the screen like it might flinch. It didn't. 3 dots appeared immediately. He's typing. A twinge of satisfaction bloomed in her chest. She pictured him pausing over the keys, heart racing, maybe even regretting his silence. Finally realizing the door was creaking open for something, closure, reconciliation, just the tiniest shift back into her orbit. Then his reply landed. About what? 2 words, no punctuation, clinical, clean, a verbal latex glove. Linda blinked. Waited. No follow-up. No, are you okay? No, let's meet. No request for time, place, or explanation. Just, about what? She reread it 5 times. Scrolled up the thread. The last time they had texted was nearly a month ago. A generic got the paperwork from Jack and a thumbs-up emoji from her. She hadn't realized how much that silence had grown until she tried to cut through it, and bounced right off. She typed, "I just think there are things left unsaid." Sent. 3 minutes passed. 4. Nothing. She started to write again, something guilt-laced, maybe vulnerable. "I didn't mean for things to end like that." But before she could send it, her phone lit up. "I said what I needed to say when I walked out. Didn't you?" And just like that, she was no longer in the driver's seat. She stared at the message, fingers twitching above the keyboard. He wasn't being cruel. That would have been easier. He was being distant. Cold only in the way a closed door is cold. It doesn't hate you. It just doesn't open. The silence that followed was worse than anger. Worse than tears. It was indifference. And it cut deeper than any shouted insult ever could. Linda set the phone down, but didn't walk away. She sat with it in her lap, thumb hovering, mind racing. For years, she'd held the upper hand. Not because Jack was weak, but because he refused to play the game. He'd been steady, predictable, safe. Now he wasn't playing at all. And without him engaged, there was no game. No win. No control. A part of her had always assumed there'd be a final reckoning. A moment where he'd crack. Confess how much he missed her. How empty the house must be. How no riverfront cabin or leather-jacketed pilot could replace 22 years. But that moment wasn't coming. He wasn't even curious. He didn't ask how she was. Didn't ask why she wanted to talk. And somewhere in the hollow of her chest, Linda felt something unfamiliar spreading like black ice. Not regret, but irrelevance. She used to be the gravity in his life. Now she wasn't even a moon worth orbiting. The tires crunched over gravel as Linda's Lexus crept up the winding path. Twilight had already spilled across the sky, That deep blue hour where headlights feel too bright and everything looks sharper than it should. She hadn't told him she was coming. That was the point. If she'd asked, he might have said no. Hell, he probably would have. She told herself it was about dignity, face-to-face resolution. But the truth buzzed louder with every bend in the road. She needed to see him, needed to feel the distance. Because texts and photos didn't carry the same weight as the moment a man looked at you and didn't flinch. The cabin appeared like a postcard, nestled between pines and framed in orange porch light. Warm. Alive. She wasn't expecting that. The gate surprised her, matte black with a keypad. Automated. The kind that said, "You don't belong unless I say you do." She hesitated, then pressed the intercom button. Buzz. A pause. Then Jack's voice, low and casual. "Yes?" She didn't know what she expected. Surprise. A little hesitation. Instead, just acknowledgement. "It's me," she said. Silence. A few heartbeats passed. Then, click. The gate swung open like a drawbridge. Not welcoming. Just functional. Linda pulled in slowly, her stomach coiling tighter the closer she got to the warm glow of the cabin windows. From the outside, she could already see it wasn't empty. Shadows moved inside. Music played, something jazzy, classic. The kind of background soundtrack people don't notice when they're comfortable. She parked and took a breath. As she stepped onto the porch, the smell hit her. Cedarwood. Slow-burning fire. Rosemary, maybe. Her heels clicked lightly on the planks, not loud, but enough to feel like she was intruding. She knocked once, out of habit. The door was already unlocked. When she stepped inside, it took a second for her eyes to adjust, and then her breath caught. Claire was in the dining nook, wearing jeans and a slate blue sweater, barefoot, sleeves pushed up. She was arranging cutlery with one hand, cradling a glass of wine in the other. Her laugh rang out, just as Jack said something from the kitchen. He was flipping something in a cast-iron skillet, wearing an apron that read "retired, not expired." Claire turned to him, grinning. And then she saw Linda. The laugh stopped. Jack didn't even flinch. He looked over his shoulder, met Linda's eyes, and said flatly, "Didn't know you were dropping by." No anger, no panic, just noticing. Claire, ever composed, stepped back slightly but didn't leave. Didn't excuse herself or grab a jacket. She took a calm sip of wine and remained exactly where she was. His table. His evening. Linda stood in the doorway, fingers curled tight around the strap of her purse, suddenly very aware of how overdressed she was, like she was walking into a scene that didn't need her. Her eyes swept the room, soft lights, polished wood, 2 plates set, a candle already burning. Not a casual visit. She had expected maybe clutter, a recluse's mess, a man lost in nostalgia. Not this. Not comfort. Not joy. Claire turned back to the table without a word, adjusting a napkin like Linda wasn't even there. Jack turned off the stove, wiped his hands, and finally stepped toward her, casually drying them on a dish towel. "You all right?" he asked. Not with concern, but like someone checking the mail. Linda tried to rally, straightened her spine. "I thought we could talk." Jack tilted his head. "Talk about what?" "Everything," she finished, voice small. He took a sip. "Everything ended, Linda." The way he said her name, like he was reminding her who she used to be, landed harder than any insult. Claire, without a word, turned and lit a second candle. The room glowed like a hearth. Safe. Unbothered. Linda looked at the table again. 2 place settings. A third wouldn't fit without rearranging everything. She was the extra chair. She cleared her throat. "I didn't expect..." Claire cut in gently, smiling without malice. "Company?" It wasn't a question. Just a confirmation. Jack said nothing. The silence roared. Linda stood frozen. 100 memories crashing through her. Thanksgivings, anniversaries, late-night arguments over money, over silence, over nothing and everything. She'd expected time to soften Jack. Instead, it had sharpened him, refined him, stripped away the parts she used to mold. And what was left? A man she didn't recognize, a life she wasn't invited to, a table that wasn't set for her. In that moment, Linda wasn't an ex-wife. She was a stranger with a key that no longer fit. "This is who you are now," Linda said, voice sharper than she meant, but breaking at the edges. She didn't recognize the version of herself that had spoken, hollow, breathless, a woman clutching for traction on ground that no longer belonged to her. Jack didn't flinch. He took another sip of his bourbon and set the glass down with surgical calm. A shrug lifted one shoulder, not dismissive, not cruel. Just fact. You wanted out, he said. I moved on. The room didn't lurch. The music didn't skip. The candles didn't flicker. But something inside Linda cracked. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was the raw, paralyzing recognition that he didn't say it to hurt her. He said it because it was true. Claire looked between them. Curiosity mildly piqued, like someone walking into the second act of a play they hadn't bought tickets for. I'm sorry, she said to Jack. Who's this? The words hit Linda like a slap in velvet. Not an insult, not passive aggression. Just a clean incision, the kind made by people with nothing to prove. Jack's eyes didn't leave Claire's. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was the answer. Linda opened her mouth, but her name, wife, partner, history, 22 years of sacrifices, had already evaporated from the room. There was no trace of it in the air. No proof she'd ever mattered here. She began, but couldn't finish. Claire tilted her head, not unkind, just curious. Sorry if we interrupted something, she said gently. Though the implication was clear, you're the one interrupting. Linda's hands clenched around the leather strap of her purse. She felt suddenly overdressed, like a museum relic in a cabin built for the living. She scanned the room for something, anything, that tethered her to this man. A photo, a keepsake, a book they used to share. But Jack had been surgical with his new life. He hadn't just removed her. He had replaced the air. Jack. She tried again, reaching for that same old tone. Half apology, half command. I just thought you'd... He looked at her then, calmly, as if examining a distant weather system he no longer had to prepare for. What? He asked. Waited. She finished, voice small. Jack's mouth twitched. Not a smile, but a quiet marvel at the irony. I did, he said. For years. Claire placed her hand lightly on his forearm, not possessive. Anchoring. She didn't need to claim anything. The room already knew where she belonged. Linda felt it viscerally. The days when she could walk into a room and bend Jack's energy toward her were gone. She wasn't his gravity anymore. She was static. She was noise. She was yesterday's forecast, irrelevant, forgotten, and already replaced by clearer skies. Linda stayed frozen in place, a statue with perfect posture and no foundation beneath it. The question hung in her throat longer than she wanted. She hated the crack in her voice, the way desperation clung to every syllable. But something in her, the last flicker of the woman who once ran that marriage like a CEO, still needed an answer. Did I ever... She swallowed the bourbon-scented air catching in her throat. Did I ever mean anything to you? The room didn't move. Claire had turned away politely, giving the illusion of privacy without really leaving. The jazz record had shifted into a slower tune, something low and thoughtful, like the soundtrack of a memory being tucked away. Jack set down his glass. Didn't rush. Didn't sigh. Just looked at her. His eyes, those same eyes that once softened when she walked barefoot into the kitchen on Sundays, hair messy, wearing his old Air Force sweatshirt, were now calm. Detached, but not cruel. And that, somehow, was worse. You did, he said. A pause. And then, until you decided I didn't. The sentence didn't explode. It sank. Heavy. Irrefutable. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't venom. It was just the truth. Linda stood there blinking, trying to slow the spin of the room. Those 8 words shattered more than she had expected. Not because they were unfair, but because she realized she couldn't argue with them. He wasn't referring to the day she filed. No, this cut went deeper. Years before, in the way she had started pulling away long before she found the courage to make it official. The passive distance, the cold dinners, the strategic silences, the book club lies, the sister's house that wasn't really the sister's. Jack had felt all of it, quietly, patiently, until his own reservoir ran dry. And now she stood before him, asking for something that didn't exist anymore. A thread that had been cut and burned and scattered into the wind outside that very cabin. Jack didn't move toward her, didn't reassure her, didn't apologize, because he didn't owe her that, and she knew it. Linda looked at Claire, who remained composed, eyes respectfully lowered, but fully aware of what was happening. Not intruding, not claiming victory, just present, as if she knew closure wasn't something Jack had to give. It was something Linda had to accept. Linda opened her mouth. One last breath. One last Hail Mary. But there was nothing left to say. She gave a small nod. Whether to him or to herself, she wasn't sure. Then she turned. Heels struck the hardwood like punctuation marks in a book no one was reading anymore. Each step was too loud, too deliberate. Linda hated that. Hated how the sound of her leaving filled the room more than anything she'd said. Her posture was upright, chin high. But that wasn't dignity. That was muscle memory. That was the reflex of a woman who used to walk away from arguments with a last word. Back when the silence that followed still meant something. Now it was just silence. No footsteps behind her. No pause. No doorframe leaned against by Jack. No reluctant goodbye or poorly concealed pain. Nothing behind her. Claire touched Jack's forearm with the ease of someone who didn't need to perform. She leaned into him, said something low. Linda didn't hear the words. Only the soft ripple of laughter that followed. Real, intimate, dagger-sharp in its innocence. Linda reached the door. For a second her hand hovered over the knob, half expecting, half hoping, half desperate for a voice behind her. Just one word. A name. Her name. But there was only the whisper of firewood cracking in the hearth, the rustle of cloth napkins being unfolded again, and that same jazz melody rolling into another track without pause. Jack and Claire were resuming their evening. Not because they were trying to be cruel. They simply were not waiting on her. Click. The door shut with a soft finality that roared in Linda's ears. She stood on the porch for a moment, breath fogging in the cold. The lights inside the cabin glowed warm behind her. But the chill of November bit through her coat like a reminder she didn't belong here anymore. The car door groaned when she opened it. She sat behind the wheel, hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, as if waiting for a signal that never came. Nothing. Not even a flick of the curtain. Not even a glance. The gravel crunched beneath her tires as she reversed down the hill, headlights carving through the dusk. And as the cabin disappeared behind the trees, so did the version of Jack she'd held onto all this time. He wasn't hers. Not in memory. Not in theory. Not in regret. He'd walked away long before she had the courage to. But now, she was the one being left behind. The house was silent. Not the kind of quiet that follows a long day or the hush before sleep. This was something else. Something Linda had only started noticing after Jack left. A stillness that filled the hallways like smoke. It clung to the baseboards, settled in the couch cushions. Stretched across the bed she now lay in diagonally but never fully claimed. She didn't turn the lights on. The only glow came from her laptop screen, balanced on her knees as she sat curled on the couch in her silk robe, a glass of untouched wine sweating on the table beside her. The living room looked like a catalog spread, symmetrical pillows, matching art, the candle still burning from earlier. But it might as well have been a museum. She opened X and hovered for a moment on the search bar. Jack Thompson. Her fingers hesitated. The app filled in the rest. The profile was public. No drama. No rants. No messy texts. Just a handful of quiet posts. A trout he'd caught. A photo of the fireplace. A grainy shot of a hawk from the porch. But tonight, there was something new. She saw it instantly. The photo showed Jack knee-deep in the Snake River. Fly rod in one hand, the other arm looped loosely around Claire's waist. They weren't posing. They weren't performing. They were laughing, squinting into the sun, soaked to their thighs, eyes crinkled and full of life. Claire was holding up a net with a fish wriggling inside it. Jack's hat was askew, his mouth open mid-laugh. He looked younger. Not just younger, lighter. There was a caption beneath it. Life begins when you let go of what's already gone. Linda stared at the screen longer than she meant to. Her own reflection ghosted in the glass, lined, lacquered, and a little too sharp. She used to be the standard, the one other wives compared themselves to. Now she felt like a Polaroid from a drawer no one opened anymore. Outdated, overlit, forgotten. The woman Jack used to need no longer existed, and the man he'd become. She wouldn't have recognized him even if he'd walked right past her in a crowded room. She closed the laptop, slowly, gently, like shutting a coffin lid. The darkness pressed in around her, thick and total. Her hand drifted toward the wine, but she didn't lift it. Just sat there, robe loose at the collar, mascara smudged faintly from earlier when she still thought she had control over how the night would end. He hadn't just walked away. He had grown. And not in spite of her absence, but because of it. She hadn't lost the man she married. She had lost the man he had finally become when she stopped being the one standing in his way.